Welcome to Art Talk with April. I'm April Harris of Inked April and the host of this podcast. This is season 4. We have some amazing artists on. I can't wait to share them with you. So let's get started. Hi everyone, today we have Tracy Ingham, realism painter who is practicing in oils and acrylics and watercolors and more. So welcome to the show, Tracy, and let's just get right into it. Well, I gotta say, I am really interested in talking with you today because so I watched some of your videos. I watched more recent, the video where you're talking about the glazes.
Yeah.
And, what a glaze is and isn't. And then you do oil painting and acrylics and watercolor.
Yeah.
And I noticed that with your oil paintings, it's very detailed, right? And then your acrylics, you're being looser and doing more texture kind of things. And then with your watercolor, you didn't have, I think, the instruction behind watercolor as much.
No.
And so you were like, I watched the one where you were doing a tree. It was just a tree trunk.
Yep.
And I was like, okay, because I love trees. I love painting trees. I just love the texture of trees. And so, and you were doing that and you're like, I don't know if this is the way you're supposed to do it, but this is the way that I do it.
Yeah.
And so with your glazing video, that's kind of how I feel about it. Like, I'm like, I don't know what this is called. I don't know what I'm doing here. What is the difference? I don't know if this is glazing or not.
Well, and that started with a video I watched, and this person was going on, and he's like, I'm glazing. And then he goes, now wait, we're going to wipe this off and look how beautiful this is. And right away, the little voice in my head went, that's not glazing.
Yeah.
That's staining. Glaze. Well, it's okay. It kind of be like best way to describe it is a glazed donut. When you pour the sugary glaze over a donut. Okay, now wipe it off. It's not a glazed donut anymore. It's just a frosted donut.
Yeah.
That's exactly the same thing for art. It becomes a stain when you wipe it off, and then there's the whole wash thing. I was going to do one on too, which is. Because I see a lot of people talk about washes. Well, a wash is only the first thin layer you put on. Watercolor does it a lot. And you put a wash on the paper to change the color.
Yeah.
Washes soak in. Glazes don't. See, that's the big difference. So it's like, want to explain, and for me, it's always been. I think we lose a lot of what art is when we lose the terminologies. And most of these terminologies have been with us for hundreds of years,
Sure.
I mean, Da Vinci on down.
Yeah.
And because I know I've used the term wash when I take a large oil and I'll retint the sky, for instance.
Yeah.
And I'll call, I'm going to put a wash over this sky. Well, it's not, it's a glaze, but you just for sake of talking, I'm going to wash over this. And so we get into it. Just, I think the terminologies are important for all the artists out there to keep up the tradition of what we're doing, and it just feels like if we start losing that, we're losing part of our history. And, generations from now, 2-3 generations down the road, we're going to end up with people who are artists, but they're not sure why they're artists, or it's been simplified so much that nobody's actually had to put the effort in anymore. It's how easy is it when you don't have to learn about what you're doing, you just do it. You know, I mean, if you're an auto mechanic, well, you can go in and you can open the hood and you can start working on things. Well, you know, you take a part and you take it to the parts store and you go, I need one of these. I don't know what it's called, but I need one of these. And pretty soon you've got somebody who's got a whole basket of parts going, I need all of these. You have no idea what they do or what they're called, but you need them.
Yeah.
It's the same way for art is, you know, it's like, well, you know, to try to explain to somebody, how do you do this? Well, I take my brush and I do this. Okay, what's that called? You know,
You know, there are artists out there that kind of study under masters still and that kind of thing, apprenticeships. But I think I don't know, I think it's more rare, you know, especially with like the internet and everything, and people just snapping pictures of their art and posting it and things like that.
And YouTube.
Yeah, yeah.
Again, I'm 50-ish, but doing it from an older viewpoint. And because I've known some amazing artists, some of the country's best. I've never had an art teacher that I cared for, but I have sat down and talked to some brilliant people.
Yeah.
And you know how it is. We'll sit down, you have coffee or wine or beer or whatever, and you can talk for hours and you exchange ideas on techniques and how somebody's doing this and that. And you go to their shows and you know, you're 4 or 5 inches from one of their pieces. And then you're like, how did you get this? And an artist will be thrilled to tell you, you know, how they got that certain technique or that certain texture. And that's where a lot of what I did was talk to them, come back, and then use or experiment with what they told me.
Yeah.
And so that was 90% of how I learned everything. Because I'm self-taught for most part. I have a couple friends on here. You've visited with one, Dan Tipton.
Yeah, yeah.
He's been a big. Him and I found each other online about 2 years ago. Him and Nick Motter,
Okay.
Minnesota artist, and it's because of them I started loosening my style and started with the acrylic in it. And Nick Motter was the biggest influence in my switching to watercolors because I'd watched him do it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you know, I think I want to try that. And so I did. But I applied my acrylic and oil techniques to watercolors.
Yeah.
That's why my stuff looks a little different.
Yeah.
With Dan, it was, you know, I watched him very loosely do stuff. And it was, he was having more fun with that than I was with my techniques of real tight oils. And so I went, hey, I'm going to try that. And I did quite a few videos on the little 1-hour paintings where it was like, okay, I'm going to do a horse. I'm going to do this or that. It's going to take me an hour.
Yeah.
You know, and that's how I loosened up my style, was that forcing myself to work very quickly.
Wow. Okay.
The acrylics have been wonderful for me. I've got a new big piece, the biggest acrylic piece I've done yet, that should be done this weekend. I call it Sadie Hawkins because we do Western photo shoots in Kansas.
Yeah.
That's where my material comes from. I'm not one to pose people in photos. I'd much rather wander around and take pictures, you know, just quietly.
Yeah.
And so there were 3 guys up on the balcony of the hotel, which, by the way, they built an entire main street on this property.
Wow.
And so there were 3 guys up on the balcony, and all the women were down below, and everybody was just having fun. And I took some pictures, and I'm like, this. So I got 7 or 8 women on horses down below the hotel with 3 men up on the balcony.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's all I could think of was the old Sadie Hawkins day dance thing. So that's why I call it that. But And then I've got an oil to finish and another watercolor to finish. And then my son and I I'm gonna walk away from 2D for a little bit so my son and I can do some 3D work.
Oh, okay. So like sculpture and that kind of thing, or
Yeah, we
okay.
have one concrete metal welding piece drawn out we're gonna do. And
Wow.
then we've got some metal sculpture pieces we're gonna work on. And we're so I have this exhibit
Hmm.
of the 40 Western pieces. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
And so now we're going to try and do some pieces that take up floor space to
Oh,
complement the exhibit.
yeah,
That's what we're doing.
yeah.
So,
Wow. I mean, like, so I myself am an artist who is very detailed and very, I guess, like tight and
mhm.
you know, very, very caught up in the detail. And that's one of those things that I've often wondered about is, and I mean, I guess there's a place for all different types of art, right? It's like you're kind of wanting to find whether or not you're going to do something very detailed or if you're going to do something very loose. And so you're setting these boundaries around it to try to get yourself to do it that way, right?
Yeah.
It's that's just so fascinating to me because that's one of those things I thought a lot of artists say, you know what, I need to loosen up. I need to loosen up. And I'm thinking, do I need to loosen up? Is that what's wrong? Like, I need to change this and loosen up. Like, okay, do I need to try that? Like, what made you feel like you needed to, you know, e- experiment with that?
Okay. So Iowa is notorious for our winters, and Mother Nature had part of a hand in this
Yeah.
because oil paints do not dry in ultra dry climates.
Mm,
Well, oil paint takes longer to dry. I've taught this
yeah.
for years. So if you get down on the Gulf, oil paints dry fairly quickly
Yeah.
because the high humidity, high air pressure stuff. Now, when you get into Iowa, Minnesota, we have these months long winters and humidity is near zero. Oil paint takes forever to dry. I mean, I can paint something today in the middle of January that 2 weeks later is still going to be wet.
Wow.
Now that same thing in July when it's raining out, 3 days max, and it's
Yeah.
dry. And so I got to this point where it's like I want to be able to paint in the winter, and I have so many ideas. Um, and I didn't want to be held up because I don't want 5, 6 oil paintings sitting around.
Yeah.
So I went and I got the acrylics. And as you were saying, for me, the tight and the loose and whatnot is based on the medium I'm using.
Mm,
That's for me in my own head how I know the difference.
yeah.
But so that's what I did. I went to the acrylics because they're a winter paint, a more friendly winter paint for me than oils are. So and then watercolors are a convenience for me. I can come into my studio. I've got what is it, third? I'm trying to think out what my studio space is here. It's like 40 foot by 20,
Yeah.
and but I can come in here and pick up watercolors and spend 20 minutes, put the brushes down, walk away. I don't have any cleanup. I don't have any mess, anything like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but anyway, back to the whole loose. For me, it's based on mediums.
Yeah. So I mean, it's, but I mean, you could do the acrylics really tight and detailed
Mhm.
if you wanted to,
Yeah, can.
but you're choosing to do it really loose and textured. So you're just trying to separate the mediums by doing it differently, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a different mindset. So when
Yeah.
the acrylics come out and the palette knives come out, and I don't do palette knives with oils.
Sure.
When that all comes out, I kind of go more primal with palette knives
Mm,
than I do, because the moment I get those fine brushes in my hand, my brain triggers,
yeah.
and now I'm 12 inches from my canvas.
Mm,
Where when it's acrylics and it's palette knives and the bigger brushes, because I don't use the small brushes with acrylics, now
yeah.
I'm arm's length away, and that's where the looseness comes in.
Mm,
Is it's not so much. This may sound a little weird. It's not so much the fine motor skills of the fingers anymore, but it's the motor skills from the shoulder down.
yeah.
It's the whole movement now that
Yeah.
I'm doing. Where if I get that little tiny brush that's got them 4 or 5 hairs in it, you know what I'm talking about, right?
I do. I really do.
Yeah, your
I'm
shoulder.
obsessed with the detail stuff. I feel like I need to let this go. Like I am getting really, because like I have friends who are artists that are all about color. Like they're
Yeah,
just very bright and colorful. And they're, they do just sweeping lines of paint and don't even think about the detail part of it. And here I am taking these paintings and I'm like, just I've got the tiniest, smallest little, and I'm just doing everything just so, you know, just
yeah,
look at man. I'm like, is this what I should be doing? So when I saw that acrylic video and you were doing like a buffalo and you were doing the palette knives, and I
yep,
was like, okay, this is so different from his oil stuff. And I'm thinking, like I get the oil stuff, I get it, I'm there, I'm with you. But then when you switch to the acrylics and you're being looser intentionally, I was like,
mhm,
why? Why is he doing it? You know,
yeah,
but that's just because in my artist's mind, that's one of the things that I've been asking myself lately. It's like, okay, what's the point? Why am I doing all these tiny little bit details? Does anyone even notice the little details or, you know, and it's time consuming.
yes, it is. It's very time consuming, and you're and to answer your question from my perspective, yeah, everybody noticed the details because that was what I got caught up in early on in my career. Is I wanted people, the closer they get, to see more and more detail. Yes.
Okay.
So from 6 feet away, there was detail, and from 4 feet, and then 2 feet, and
Oh,
it just kept. And then I kind of, it's still something with my oils that I work at, but with the acrylics, it's when you have a gallery show and people are walking by, everybody's 6, 8 feet away from a piece. That's, they don't really get any closer than that. You'll get a few that lean in and look for detail and stuff, but it's, I understand there's a place for detail and there's a place to not have detail. And like I still do. I think you may have seen I did these little 8x10 military pieces,
yeah.
oil paintings. And those, yeah, those are genuinely 8x10 originals and extremely detailed for the purpose of, I wanted these really detailed miniatures. And I've also done the bigger military pieces. I think the biggest I've got is almost like 3 foot by 4 foot.
Yeah.
But I don't know. For me, I'm kind of losing the importance of the detail.
Mhm.
The older I get, the more I'm interested in sharing the idea
Mm.
more than I am um, more than I am the technique. Maybe that's part of what it is. If you're going to take 180 hours to do a 12-inch by 12-inch flower, people are impressed by the detail. Everybody's, but I think those pieces lack emotion.
Mm.
I think they're relying solely on impressing people with the amount of detail you put into it. And the bigger Western pieces I'm doing now get a much better reaction emotionally from people than my detailed work did. And that's where I'm learning, even now at this point, I'm affecting people more with the looser style. Yeah, you're impressing people on different levels with different things.
Yeah. I mean, and I think when you're talking about this, I'm thinking about Dan's work is very much like very expressive and loose, and he'll use that term loose.
Yeah.
I'm like, is that Dan? Do I need to do that? Like I need to reach out and be like, are you telling me that this is what I need to be doing?
The easiest way to do it, in all seriousness, the easiest way to loosen up your style is just to step back from your canvas or whatever you're painting on.
Yeah.
Put it up, and instead of being, again, 6 to 12 inches,
Yeah.
step back, and you will find out it's not going to take you really long to figure out you're still putting the detail in, but the detail is now from that arm's length away, and it took me a long time to learn that. And Dan helped me with that, over the last 2 years, watching his stuff and watching him work. And so I always say those are my two best friends online. And it is. And then there was a young woman that did the same thing, and she was doing the looser stuff. I haven't seen her in a while, so I don't know if she's even still out there creating art. But I picked him up from different people, and I'm having a blast. I'm having absolutely the best time I have ever had painting, with a mix of the three mediums I use.
Yeah.
It's just such, because it's become very, very emotional for me. My work is always based on how I'm feeling. And so if I'm not feeling like I really want to do a lot today, I can do watercolors. And if I feel like, I'm just in a mood to throw paint, I can get the palette knives and the acrylics going. And if I'm in one of those really quiet, pensive moods where I just want to play some music and be left alone, I can get the oils out. So it's very much just mood-based for me anymore.
Wow. Oh, that's fascinating. I just, and that's another thing that I've like through different interviews with different artists have talked to them about, basically why we're choosing the mediums that we do, or the size that we do, or the subject matter and that kind of thing. And I see a lot of artists, choosing, based on things like mood or capability, like they can't physically do a large piece, or they, want to get really detailed into a smaller piece or something like that. And that's what, kind of steers their direction and what they're doing. And so I've recently been doing a lot of digital art and on my iPad. And you get detail. You're going to get what I'm saying here, but I can zoom in
to
the pixels, and it has become. I think it's bad. I think it's bad to do that because it's like, like hyper real. Like it's like way closer than my actual eyes could get to like some paper or canvas.
Yep.
And so I'm even going further into the detail than I would have if I were doing traditional. So, man, that's just one of those things I really wanted to talk to you about. So I appreciate you giving me your opinion on it, because that's just, one of those things that I was stuck in myself. So I really wanted to kind of go back a little bit So, how did you get started in painting, in creating?
I've been an artist since I drew my first breath.
Mm,
Uh, I don't remember a time when I wasn't. I ended up I made money, bought my own school clothes and everything when I was 16 years old. I used to go and cut this way back. We gather wood for winter out on the farm, and I would cut slabs of trees, and
yeah.
I would do little farmhouse paintings on these slabs of trees,
Oh, okay.
and that's how I got my start. And I remember vividly 10, 11 years old, and I would walk down to the library and I would get art books,
Mhm.
and I would sit and with a magnifying glass and I would study the paintings of
Yeah.
these. Do you remember? I don't know if you remember them or if you've seen them, or the old fashioned big art books where a page would be a Rembrandt or a Vermeer.
Sure, sure.
They were just these amazing books.
Yeah.
And so I would sit and I would look at these and I would figure out. Yeah, that's how I figured out tones and hues and values.
Mm,
And to sit there and look at Vermeer and go, okay, so he lightened as he came out. He did this and he did that, and I could see the
yeah.
brush strokes in Rembrandt, and it's like, okay. And then I always give credit to uh, all the old masters, but because I always say they were my greatest teachers.
Mm,
Just watching them and or looking at their works.
yeah, sure.
And then I ended up getting, I just kind of got lucky. I got into a few galleries as a kid, local galleries, had a few pieces hanging. And, I'd get $100 or 150 on a painting. And barn doors. Oh my God, I got into the habit of painting on barn doors when I was 17, 18 years old.
Wow.
Ran around the country collecting barn doors off these old barns that were being tore down.
Wow.
And those ended up, I'd get $300-400 for those.
Yeah.
And I mean, to be a 17-year-old artist making $300-400 a barn door, and all I was doing was painting barns on a barn door.
Oh, that's awesome.
Pretty simple, wasn't hard,
Yeah.
And it got to the point, I could walk into somebody's place, and lo and behold, there'd be this 4 foot tall by 3 foot wide barn door hanging on their wall. And it just kind of fueled everything I was doing.
Wow.
And then I went out into the world, and I had a real estate license, and I was a carpenter for 32 years on and off. And tried to do everything but art, because I don't know if you've ever had that feeling where you're doing something and you're like, I don't want to do this,
Mm,
but it's not what you do, it's who you are. And that's, for me, that's always been the thing, is art it's who I am.
yeah.
I always I always have this real quick little story I'll share.
Sure.
And I've told it for years. So a guy struggling to be an artist, he dies.
Mhm.
Okay. Next thing you know, he's sitting around a pond in heaven,
Mhm.
and he's fishing. But I always have this vision of God and one of the angels coming up going, hey, we're gonna send you back. We're gonna, you're gonna be reincarnated. And the guy goes, so I'm gonna get to be an artist again? God goes, no, we're sending you back to be a doctor this time. And the guy goes, no, I'd rather not. Thank you very much. I think I'll stay here. And so tries to talk him in. Well, are you sure? Because you're going to go be a doctor. You're going to save people. Yeah, but I'm not going to be an artist. So if you don't mind, I think I'd rather stay here. And this was a whole story in my head where, as God's walking away and the angel's walking with him, the guy goes, or the angel looks at God and goes, maybe you should have told him he's the man that cures cancer. And God looks at the angel and goes, nah, wouldn't have made any difference. He's an artist. And that's the story I've told everyone. It's like, that's my perception of an artist is, doesn't matter where you are or what you're doing, you're an artist, and that's the way I felt my whole life.
Mm.
So
That is that's a good perspective, a good story that kind of, first of all, just calling yourself an artist, like some people being able to say, I'm an artist, that's a whole thing, because artists are, I don't know, magical beings. I don't know. But then they're like, okay, I'm an artist, but they aren't selling their work, or they're not in a gallery, or they're not famous, they're not in the big museums or whatever.
Yep.
And so maybe I'm not an artist, I'm going to go be an accountant over here and give it up. But meanwhile, they're always thinking about like making art, like it's their everyday, day-to-day stuff. Then 30 years goes by and they get into, they find their art in the attic. Oh, I should really try that again. And they start doing it all over again. But the whole time they were an artist. There was no point where they weren't, and they were an accountant or they were something else, So, I mean, that's basically like what your story is kind of saying.
Oh, yeah. And some of the greatest artists I've ever met. Auto body guys.
Yeah.
Oh, holy, those guys are absolute magicians and artists. And I watched them do some amazing stuff with, rebuilding cars and body forming or the woodworkers. I mean, you've seen them. Some of the woodworkers are pure artists, from,
absolutely.
You can see it in their souls. These are artists. And it's for me, it's been simplified that, artist always applies to somebody who's putting paint on a canvas. And I think that's really a very narrow concept of what an artist is. I think there are people out there who are every bit an artist as anybody else, who are baking, who, like I said, who are auto body work, who are building whatever they're building. They're all these amazing, creative people. But the only people that get talked about are the ones who put paintings on a wall for people to walk around and look at. I mean, you've probably seen some amazing architecture. Some of those old Southern homes. Holy cow. With all the little fretwork and the carvings and all the little stuff on them, you're like, those are craftspeople, but those are also artists. I mean, true artists.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's one of those things that really, I think, is kind of a soapbox for me personally, is like, you can, just because you're not doing oil paintings and they're not hanging in a gallery somewhere or something like that, that doesn't mean that what you're doing isn't art.
I was always told in this world, you can be one of three things: first, great, or different. Now, chances are none of us are going to be first anymore. Very few of us that are ever going to be really great at anything, or we can be different, because I was always told, I said, well, people remember you if you're good at something, or there was a difference in the three because, in order to become an icon, you had to be good. You had to meet all three of them criteria. You had to be first, great, and different. And,
I'm writing this down, Tracy. I'm writing this down.
Like you have like Elvis. Elvis was first, great, and different, right?
Yeah. Okay.
And then you have Michael Jordan, first, great, and different. And so when you look back, you see all these icons of our history, and they all met them three criteria. And then you go down one, you go, okay, well, who were two of those things? And you can find somebody that you can think of who was two of those three things.
Yeah.
They were really good, or they were first, or they were this or that. And so that's what I keep I've told my children is, if you want to make a name for yourself, you got to be first, great, or different. One of those three. If you can get two, great. If you can get all three, better than I am.
Yeah, really. That seems like, especially the first thing, like being first at something just seems completely impossible at this point.
It
So that's
does.
pretty amazing in itself.
The National Watercolor Society just rejected two of my pieces, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
They have a 8 by 8 show. Each
Oh,
piece could
okay.
only be 8 inches by 8 inches, and it was for an exchange with the Royal Watercolor Society in Scotland.
Wow,
So
okay.
my dream was to get one piece in the Scottish exhibit.
Yeah.
That's all. It was really cool. Um, but my watercolors I just picked them up last October, so I'm just like 10 months into watercolors.
Sure.
And I'm like, I don't think my watercolors are quite ready for the international stage. And I don't know if they ever will be, but I have fun entering them. I have a piece going up to Wisconsin next month for a national watercolor show. And they had one down in Texas, 4 or 5 months ago. And
Yeah.
so it's kind of that validation, just
Mm.
getting a couple watercolors in. It's like, okay, I'm not doing everything right, but I'm doing some things right. I'm doing enough right to get them
Yeah.
in, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I did the same thing with watercolor actually. So I was like really into pen and ink. And so I was doing these extremely detailed pen and ink drawings at 24 by 36. So, and then I would use like a point one to do the whole thing. And just really absurd, right? And then I'm like, okay, I'm gonna try watercolor and maybe add some pen and ink in there. And I didn't actually take a class or learn from anybody. I just picked it up and started doing things with it. And so when I watched your video on watercolor, I was like, okay, you were like, I don't know if this is the way you do it. And I'm thinking, that's the exact way that I do it. I don't know what he's talking about. But I mean, I learned on my own, and that was just the
Yeah,
way that I thought I would need to do it, like with the highlights, like not leaving the paper, but going back and adding it later. And I
that's what
don't
I
know
do.
what that is, but I can't do it the other way. Like, I don't think I can, like, make myself, leave white paper where I think
Yeah.
the highlight is gonna be. That's just like my mind can't work in that direction.
My brain don't work there either.
Yeah.
I tried. It don't. No, I go so I do. I go back in and I put my highlights in like you do.
Yeah, yeah,
That white and
yeah,
as you know, you gotta leave that white fairly thick to get
yeah,
it
yeah.
white. Yeah.
And so, like, the watercolor paintings that are in these different, shows, what were they of? What was your subject matter?
Oh, my Western, my
Okay.
watercolor Westerns, cowboys, cowgirls. It was just, because the odd thing is the watercolors started out I would do the watercolors first before I did the acrylics to make sure my compositions, my colors and everything were right.
Oh, okay,
So
yeah.
I do these little watercolors. And then I got into the point, like I said, with time wise, where I'm like, well, I'm going to do these watercolors. And I was setting them aside thinking I'm going to do these much larger pieces. And instead, I ended up going, I like the watercolors.
Yeah.
They were kind of sort of standalone at that point. And then I got bigger. I don't know if you saw the big street brawl one, which I'm going back in and redoing a little bit.
Yeah.
But I got like a 24 by 30 of everybody fighting in the street. And that was the first one I think I've done that was intentionally meant to be a standalone piece with no intention of doing an oil or acrylic of it later,
Yeah.
type thing. Um, and I think that's when my watercolors have kind of gone out on their own, and for me, for the first time, been a standalone medium instead of the precursor to becoming something else. You know,
Yeah.
I'm not a sketcher, so I don't sit down and I sketch ideas, but not to a refined detail that, I would work with. How do I put it that way? So that's what my watercolors became, so that I could physically see the colors of
Mm,
the pieces I wanted to do. And I've had several, and I've got quite a few around here that I haven't ever shown anybody because, I did something in green and the original painting then came out to be more brown or more of a fall
sure.
because it lacked the depth. You can only stack so many greens in a painting before it flattens out. But,
Yeah.
it, you've got to vary color. And so anyway, yeah, a lot of my watercolors ended up being that
Mm.
um, until I just realized I can create with them on my own, so that's where I'm at right now with them.
Are your watercolors more on the loose side?
They were, they backgrounds are,
Yeah.
but the little, I kind of mad at myself a little bit because the 8x8s I did for the watercolor or National Watercolor Society were, in my opinion, way too tight.
Mm.
It was just, I tried to fit too much into that 8x8, and I'm going to actually post videos on those coming up to show everybody what they were.
Yeah,
Uh,
I would love to
so
see that.
yeah, you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. They're just, I should have loosened up on them and taken about half the time to do them, or at least loosened up my backgrounds and focused on my foregrounds. It would have given them more of that watery feel and look, which is what I didn't do. Uh,
Yeah,
so a couple of those may get redone. I don't know. We'll see.
yeah. And so
We
that's one thing that I think is that I would like to try is doing both. Like having some areas that are like the focal point and the detail,
Mhm.
and other areas that are more loose and I don't know, just like paint thrown, like much more just but all in the same painting.
Yeah, and that's the 3D of it. That's something I try and get in all mine. For me, it's becoming more and more of a focus is to put my backgrounds in, but leave them that blurry, that non-focal point of the painting, and then put the things in front of it
Mm.
so that so you're kind of tricking the eye into, notice this thing in front, forget everything behind it,
Yeah.
and then that creates that depth within the painting where people feel like it's more of a 3D effect. And that's what I've been trying to do a little bit more. Uh, but again, I'm one of those, it's easier to do bigger than it is smaller, you know that.
Yeah. So what I'm like, you have what I feel like are more traditional subject matter. So it's kind of Western and military and like that kind of those genres. Like, what brought you to that to do those types of art?
Well, I've been through all genres. I also did a Renaissance period
Oh yeah, okay.
where it was very heavily Renaissance. I was going to Renfests and doing the same thing, taking my camera,
Mm.
and had some very nice pieces. Did a couple shows with them, but I early on in my career, an old artist, told me it was an artist's job to record history. That's
Mm.
always stuck with me. And the reference was, I goes, first cave paintings weren't done to make the cave pretty. They were done because they needed to tell somebody a story.
Mhm.
And then I got into looking at, every war there's ever been had artists. I don't know if people even know it, but every war in
Yeah,
human history had people sitting there who were painting and drawing and
that
recording.
makes sense. I
Yeah.
never thought about it.
Well, you see these big paintings from the Revolution.
Yeah, yeah.
From France, the 1600s, 1700s, and all that. Somebody painted those,
Mm-hmm.
and they were painted to record the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And the wonderful thing about artists are we record things the way they're seen. I mean, we record them in all their wonderfulness, their terribleness, whatever. You know, I'd like to think anyway, most of us don't go in and propagandize what we're seeing. So, you know, like in current times now, if you were to paint protests or anything going on, what you're going to get is the artist's view of what's happening,
Mm-hmm.
minus the personal opinion.
Mm.
See, that's, you know, and so that's always been my thing with art is I try, so even going down and doing the Western reenactments, I'm still trying to bring a piece of the 1800s forward and let people see. So one of the things I did with my wolves when I painted wolves was I always put a little small character. The one has a 13-striped squirrel, another has a little bird in it. There's always a little character in it. And it's because wolves are not these big, terrible creatures. They're just creatures living their life like the rest of us.
Sure.
And so they would have these interactions with these little creatures. They didn't try and eat everything that came across their path, you know. And that's the same way with history for me is when I paint the Western, the one painting I have of Billy the Kid done
Mm.
from the ground up,
Yeah.
it was to change the perspective. You know,
Mm.
this is a perspective of the West. And I've got some coming up that are some that are a lot better, some that are a little bit more disturbing. But, you know, it's to let people see that their perceptions of the West aren't exactly what they think they are. Some were harder, some were easier. You know, people had fun. It wasn't just this terribleness.
Sure.
You know, people drank and partied and they had fun with everything. And so that's what I try and do in the current genre that I'm in is just that. And for me, it's to give women an equal footing
Mm.
um, from my perspective,
Yeah.
because it was very much as people, you know, the whole cowboy thing. Um, I my family, I've been here in this country since 1639. My family has,
Yeah.
and then my native side before that,
Yeah.
and my ancestry. I don't look like it. This does not look like it. Sioux from the Rosebud Reservation. They
Yeah.
were Sioux,
Okay.
and I grew up in a matriarchal family, not patriarchal.
Mm.
So grandmothers always had the power.
Yeah.
Nobody crossed grandma. That was grandpa didn't cross grandma. That's the way it worked. And so I'm also trying to bring that. So there's more women in my Western pieces than you're going to see a lot of people do,
Mm.
because women played a lot bigger role in the West than what history's recorded everybody has, you
Sure.
know.
Sure.
So when we go down and we do the reenactments and we shoot the photograph, um, yeah, it's the women on horseback, the women roping cattle, it's women in the gunfights, it's the whole, you know, across the whole spectrum.
Sure.
And that was something I wanted to do when we started. So yeah, I don't know where, you know, how long I'll be doing the Western. I'm hoping for a few more years. I have a dream of getting invited to the Charles Russell auction and sale at some point in time, but man, that's a big. I might as well dream about climbing Mount Everest.
Oh no.
That's the Charles Russell is a big the CM Russell
Yeah.
show and sale. If you don't know what that is,
I
you should.
don't, but I'm gonna look it up.
That the CM Russell, yeah, that's a monster. That's a big honor just to be invited.
Wow.
I will definitely be the bridesmaid for that one, with gladly.
So when you were talking about your westerns, I'm immediately thinking about, and this is just me maybe being my age or something, but I'm thinking of like Deadwood,
Mhm.
HBO TV show, and or 1923?
In 1883.
Yeah, 1883. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
That's kind of what kickstarted this because when 1883 came out, the cinematography was amazing. I mean, I was
Oh,
just
yeah.
blown away by it, right? And online, I have a friend who um, was associated with the show, and I
Oh.
actually got photos of. But I got pictures of her standing next to Sam Elliott, and she was the outfitter for
Wow.
him. And so anyway, we ended up. I got my sketch pad out, and I sat in front of 1883 every time, every week, and I
Yeah.
would sketch things.
Oh,
And that's where I got some of the young woman on the horseback from
yeah.
there. And then I did a lot of Western stuff. I started the old John Wayne movies and a lot of the old Westerns at that time. And that's where I'd get some sketching, watch them and do some drawings. And of course, play around with watercolors at that time, just like the pen and ink and add a little color to fill in the backgrounds and stuff. Okay,
Yeah.
that was my very first experience with watercolors. Um,
Oh, okay.
but anyway, so then coming out of COVID, I got invited to the first Western reenactment. And then from there, that's where everything's come forward. And I've tried to be as prolific as I can in producing this art.
Mm.
But yeah, that's how it all started for me was, just big old watercolor sketch pad and in
Wow.
front of sitting cross-legged on a couch in front of a TV.
I mean, those shows are good. They're really
Yeah,
good. And I mean, it really the characters really represent kind of what you were talking about. Like the women are so they're just as much in the middle of the chaos as the men are,
yeah.
and you have to be actively doing something in order just to survive, you know?
One of the big pieces I have coming up is a father, a mother, and the two daughters shooting out from the covered wagon.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And let me back this up. The father's not. The father, unfortunately, has met a tragic end in his journey west. And so the mother and the two daughters are defending
Yeah,
that, and I just, that one we set up because I'm like, I really need the action and everything involved in this piece, to
yeah.
show that, hey, when the dad wasn't there, it was mom and the kids that, had to fend for themselves.
Sure, sure.
And so that's going to be like probably a 3 foot by 4 foot piece when I get it done.
Wow.
But I'm looking forward, and that one's going to be in oil, very much the detail, the smoke coming off,
Yeah.
yeah, that's going to be
That's
one
the
of
good stuff right there, I gotta tell you.
that's yeah
I love that.
that's because when I do a show, I try and have a centerpiece. I
Mhm.
try one centerpiece, big centerpiece, so that, and I've always said this when I've had 41 solo shows in my career. I have
Wow.
been a part of over 60 group shows,
Yeah.
and I'm I understand when you hang a gallery show, you have to have that one big piece
Mhm.
that people walk in and catches their attention immediately.
Mm.
Um, because I always said that's what makes everybody want to see everything else. So, and I think that's going to be my next big showpiece is the covered wagon fight scene,
Yeah,
up close and
that would
personal.
be a good one, I think. That I mean, just, you're describing it is very interesting. So, I mean, seeing it actually done with all the detail and everything would be amazing, I imagine.
Getting the fear in the eyes is the big one.
Oh,
That,
yeah, yeah.
to catch,
The
so when
facial
people look
expression.
at it,
Yeah.
they think this young girl, I think she was probably 9 or 10 in the photo, you know, so they feel her fear.
Yeah.
And we're not, it won't show, and it won't show what they're defending against, because that's part of that. You're supposed to guess what they're defending against. That's the viewer's input into the painting.
I gotcha. Yeah. They kind of finish the story.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you're doing like a show and you're saying you have this big, like the main star
Mhm.
of the show, right? The big
Yep.
one. Are you, when you're preparing for the show, are you planning out like a story that goes through this? Or are the pieces the same mediums and the same kind of,
No, it's
genre?
for me, a show setup is highs and lows.
Okay.
So I have the big centerpiece, and then you'll have a couple little smaller pieces, and then you'll have a couple big, more focal pieces as you're
Mm,
going around the gallery. And I try and tell a story, but I also try and get people to, small piece, not real important, not real important, then a bigger piece that makes you pause and go, oh, wow, okay, take it in a little bit, and then a couple smaller pieces, like kind of like that breath
mm,
between the next big piece. Is I don't want somebody to just walk through. I
yeah.
want it like breathing. So, you take a breath on these two or three pieces, and then now suddenly there's this big, inhale. Oh, wow. And then, you take that and then go down the line a little bit. And again, it's big inhale, this nice big piece. And then, but you do that all the way around.
Yeah.
Um, and for me, the main focus is to have everybody at least find one piece that tomorrow morning, they're going to be having a conversation and go, hey, I saw this painting, and it comes to mind again.
Yeah.
And that's my show strategy when I put things together. Is I want ups and downs and highs and lows as they go around.
Mm,
So instead of just, it's kind of boring just to go hang a bunch of paintings on the wall.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, that's fascinating because I've never actually asked anybody that question before. And I was planning out a show, and that's how I was thinking about it, was like how people would walk through it, and the idea of putting smaller pieces between larger pieces makes sense to me. But now your smaller pieces, are they leading up to the larger piece? Like they have something to do with it? Or
Well, that's a you thing. I mean, that's an individual artist thing.
yeah,
It's for me, like the young lady with her boyfriend, husband, or whatever on the ground.
yeah.
Um, you hang that before you hang Billy the Kid,
Oh,
because then it's like, what is she doing? And then, oh, now it's a lead up to
yeah,
it. So you understand that now, there's Billy the Kid standing over somebody, and now you understand who Billy was standing over and what was going on, and things like that.
yeah,
So it is kind of, to tell a story, but I think it's more the two little ones, or whatever you have before, are kind of setting up the next one, or turning the page. It's a different chapter. That would be the best way to describe it. Like,
oh,
it's like you're turning the pages in a book. Uh,
oh, that,
it's like how we've all read. You have your books where you read, and you've got these lulls in there where you're like, this is kind of boring. And then you get to the action scene, right? Oh, okay, now I'm interested again. There's your art exhibit.
like, okay, the trees are like this, and all right, get on with it.
Yeah, there's your small paintings.
Oh, that's awesome. Ah, so I really enjoyed talking to you, and I've picked your brain a little bit.
That's fun. I'm having a blast. It was fun. It is.
But where can we find your work? How can people look at your work and get in touch with you about it?
Torncrow.com. That's TORNCROW.
All right. That's
Yep,
awesome.
that's my old studio name, and I left it behind years ago, and then I was on GoDaddy one day and I typed it in, and there it was. It was never available until recently. And
Wow.
I went, mine, click.
Yeah, I like it. That's a really good name. I like that a lot.
Yeah, it's my son's name. Torin Crow is his name.
Oh,
His middle name's actually from a story, an old Sioux story that I was told, where real quick, the crow used to be the most colorful bird in the world in legend.
okay.
And there was a young boy sitting on a cliff and he was crying because he wanted to be an artist. And the crow heard him cry. So the crow flew down and gave the boy his color and magic paintbrushes, which is why the crow's black. So when my son came along, his name was Torin Crow, Ingham.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
That's
that's,
a great story. Oh
thank
man.
you.
I love that. Well, it has been amazing talking to you. I am very confident that lots of people will learn lots of things. So
I'm just glad it's a real pleasure to be invited on your podcast, and I thank you so much.
thank you so much for listening to this episode of Art Talk with April. For more information on this episode, join the Facebook group, The Art Lounge. Please subscribe and share. See you next Tuesday. Hope you have a great week.